Beautiful day, African family. Welcome to another edition of the African Liberation Media Show. I'm your co-host, Brother Amos, here with co-host Elder Baba Makaru. How you doing tonight, Baba Makaru?
Hey, every day is a blessing, good brother. Another day, opportunity to talk to the African family and discuss what's going on. Many issues facing us in the African world as we push towards a Bibi for Hodie, African liberation and empowerment.
Ashe. And we say a BB Fahodi at the beginning and closing of every show. This is the mantra that was given to us by our Elder Baba Walima Barudi, which comes from the Twi language in West Africa, meaning African liberation. So we say Bibi Fahodi meaning African liberation. And today we're dealing with multiple topics that will hopefully help Africans on the continent achieve liberation. We've seen a lot of videos floating around on the internet as it relates to Burkina Faso. We know the great warrior leader there, Ibrahim Traore, who took over during a military coup in Burkina Faso. And a lot of the titles in the videos have been saying that, he has introduced a new currency. So we know that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are all looking together to create a currency underneath their alliance, which they formed, uh, which is called the Alliance of the Sahel States,
I
also
think
known as the AES. And this is an alliance that was a military alliance, and now they're looking to form an economic alliance. And in my opinion, this is the correct way that it should be done. We know last year there were coup attempts that took place that were foiled by Burkina Faso, where they found some military personnel who tried to stage a coup against Ibrahim Traore. So we know that when you're an African leader and you are new to office and much of what you are looking to do is to liberate the country from the neocolonialism and the grip that Western countries, specifically countries like France, have over the wealth in the country, then you're going to be targeted. And we saw this in history with various leaders on the continent, but right here in this specific country, our great ancestor Thomas Sankara, who Thomas Sankara, who was assassinated by his own compadre, excuse me, Blaise Compaore.
mm-hmm.
And the reason why I said that I think it's an intelligent move of how they chose to form a military alliance first is because we've seen multiple times where leaders have tried to create an economic alliance or circumvent the US dollar or the euro, etc., and would be targeted quickly and swiftly taken out.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things that many people believe got Muammar Gaddafi killed was his ambitions to create an African currency. And I've been vocal about my belief in one of the mistakes that many of the countries who are members of BRICS have made is in an attempt to form an economic alliance without establishing some sort of military alliance so that they can have a protection against those individuals who would try to thwart their success in being able to successfully circumvent Western currencies. So I have to give much respect to not only Burkina Faso, but also Mali and Niger, who stood up against ECOWAS and not only uh, said that we're leaving ECOWAS when ECOWAS tried to sanction them, but they band together and formed a military alliance and now an economic alliance, which we hope will produce what they're intending to produce, which is a new West African currency that they can use with each other. And not only have they formed that military alliance together, but they've also been in close ties with Russia and China. We know that Russia was instrumental with helping Burkina Faso set up some nuclear power plants. And we know that China has been also instrumental in various things. So this is something to keep an eye on, the progress that could come from this formation. And it will be interesting to see what other West African countries, when the success of these countries starts to rise, it'll be interesting to see what other West African countries will try to maybe leave ECOWAS or form an alliance with these countries. As we know it now, when we look at ECOWAS and we look at Ghana, we look at Nigeria, we can clearly see two states that have been compromised, two countries that have been compromised, at least at the top level. Not saying that everyone in the government is compromised, but we can clearly see that Akufo-Addo and the leader of Nigeria are two individuals who are controlled puppets of Western nations.
Yeah, very definitely. I think that this alliance or association is something that African states really across the continent should consider, where they have a common goals and objectives in terms of liberating and empowering African people, because the initial unity or formations of states that had a specific objective and perspectives during the colonial era of African history. It started with organizations such as the Casablanca Group, which included Guinea under Secretary Ghana under Kwame Nkrumah. Egypt under Nasser was also part of that. And the neo-colonialists at the time formed an organization called the Monrovia States. And this included particularly the stalwarts or the pillars of French neo-colonialism in Africa, Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire in particular, in addition to Liberia and some of the other states. And eventually these blocks merged into what became the Organization of African Unity. And we have seen that the Organization of African Unity, which is now the African Union, over the years has been dominated by neo-colonial puppets, people essentially working in the interests of their former colonizers, along with the United States, which got involved in the neo-colonial game during the Eisenhower administration under the which was primarily led by the Dulles brothers, Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA, and John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State. The United States helped engineer the overthrow of Patrice Lumumba. And then, of course, they, under the Johnson administration, they organized the coup against Kwame Nkrumah in 1966. So there has been this struggle over who controls Africa, because Africa is the most important landmass in terms of natural resources and minerals on the planet Earth. There's no question about that. And what we have seen recently with these coups that have taken place, which have removed neo-colonial leaders, particularly in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and also in Guinea, we have seen that these countries recognize a need to be not isolated entities, but to actually have a federation of states. And so they started this, as Brother Amos said, as they started with a military alliance, which is moving towards being a political alliance, and now economically, um, as they say, uh, you know, if you want to be a sovereign nation, you have to control your own currency. And we know that when nations in the world, particularly in the former colonial world, start speaking in terms of economic independence from the American dollar, that causes a lot of problems. But what I want to say is that I think this particular moment, given the fact that the tribes of the North Atlantic are consumed by the war in Ukraine, they are heavily invested in attempting to defeat the Russian Federation, remove Vladimir Putin from office, and they're using Ukraine as a battering ram to do that. They have been totally unsuccessful, since this conflict escalated into what could be considered a full-blown war, although I think Russia has been extremely restrained in terms of the way they've processed this war. They have been consumed. So NATO is heavily invested in Ukraine. And then we have the United States, which is considered to be the premier power, the hegemon on the planet, is now heavily involved in the war that's taking place in Palestine, the genocide against the Palestinians. So this is a period of time where they have a focus on other areas. Not to mention that the United States is also looking sideways, out of the corner of its eye at Taiwan to try to keep China in check. So I think this is the moment. This is the moment for these countries to move towards, self-reliance, to move towards a Bibi Fahodie, because the attention of the tribes of the North Atlantic is spread. Is consumed by these major conflicts. So I think an opportunity to do something presents itself, and we know that they extended an invitation to the elected president of Senegal to join the alliance, but he actually asked them to rejoin ECOWAS. I don't know if Brother Amos is planning to discuss that, when we get to another part of the program. But I think there's an opportunity here. It's possible that they could, in fact, change the focus of ECOWAS. But if not, then why not join this federation and move towards self-reliance and economic independence by establishing your own currency?
Yes, sir. That definitely is something that we would definitely go into go into next. And to your point about what's going on around the world right now, there is such thing as you say as a perfect time to strike. And I think what the United States tried to do in preparation for this years ago was to establish AFRICOM in various countries on the African continent, because they knew it would come a time where they would be stretched thin militarily in supporting these Israeli-led wars, which eventually could lead to what people are calling World War III. But even with that, with AFRICOM being in all these African countries, it still is an opportune time to go for liberation. And by these African countries forming a bloc, not a bloc that is a facade like the AU, but an actual bloc that's really built around liberating themselves from slavery.
Mm-hmm.
As Ibrahim Traore quoted and saying, we're going to remove everything that enslaves us.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes right into our next topic of them extending a invitation to the newly elected president, I believe you pronounce his name, Faye, in Senegal, president who was elected at the age of 44 years old, who just started a political party only I believe it was 8 years ago, 2016,
I think it was 2014.
2014. Only 10 years ago, started a political party. And we know that many of these, political parties have held power. A lot of them have held power since the end of the colonial regime.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to have a relatively new party and rise up amongst the ranks and be elected, it shows that when you can actually have a fair process, people want change. People want something that's going to be more productive in the country than the same guard that's going to continue to sell itself out to Western nations. The next thing we'll have to look into is how will the West respond to this election,
Mm-hmm.
because they definitely don't want to see this replicated across the continent. The last thing that they want is for youthful leadership to be elected, because it's harder to control the youth and it's harder to control people who are not corrupted, especially when you get people who are coming in as a new politician from the outside and not associated with a political party that's been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Many of those political parties already are corrupted. They already have ways that they get their money and their funding, and people are just stepping into those roles specifically just to have a career path that's going to continue to pay them out well.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the United States always calls for free and fair elections in other countries, but we know that they try to influence elections to get leaders elected that they want to be in office that they can cut the deals with.
Mm-hmm.
From a business standpoint, it'll be interesting to see if they go in and start to actually help these other African leaders keep their elections corrupt
Hmm.
so that they can hold power in places where they want those leaders to stay in power so that they can control the continent the way that they do. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to look for ways to expose any corruption that we see in these processes, whether that's getting the word out online or on the ground. But we have to be a step ahead of them, because we know that they're going to try to prevent another Senegal from happening.
Hmm. You know, the interesting thing is that amongst the phone calls that President Faye received were from people like Emmanuel Macron of France and Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State of the United States. Obviously, this is not something they wanted to happen. They really thought that they had the situation pretty much under control. They thought that they would be able to have Macky Sall, who had been the president of Senegal, to change the rules of the country and run for a third term. This is what they were hoping. And when this political party was started by Ousmane Sonko and Brother Faye, Sonko immediately connected, his message connected, it resonated with the youth of Senegal. Senegal has a population, 60% of the population is under the age of 25. And the message that they were articulating simply resonated, in the hearts and the minds of the youth of Africa. And, I remember talking to some of my friends from Senegal last June, and they were telling me that they believed these are brothers and sisters from Senegal who currently live in the United States, were saying that there was no doubt in their mind that if free and fair elections were held, Sonko would be elected president. And they identified his organization, his party, as what they called a Pan-African party. a party that they consider to be built on the ideas of people like, Kwame Nkrumah, Sheikh Anta Diop, and others. But the government of Senegal uh, moved politically to incarcerate, to arrest Sanko. Uh, the charges were, I asked them about the charges they're involving, some kind of situation with a lady, or perhaps in a massage parlor somewhere, something or another, and they use that situation, whether the charges were trumped up or actually, specifically what happened, whether a crime was committed. They barred him from running for the president. Part of the court ruling that led to his incarceration said that he would not be allowed. His name would not be allowed to appear on the ballot. At the same time, at some point after Brother Sanko was arrested, they also arrested, or they detained Brother Faye on some trumped up charges. But they made the mistake of not barring him from the ballot. And so what they decided to do, this shows that these brothers are not about, egos, I have to be the person that's in charge, or whatever, the person is the leader or the president or whatever. They made an agreement that, if since Sanko couldn't get on the ballot, that Faye would represent the political party on the ballot. Now, we saw from a previous video that the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, was involved in conversations with Macky Sall to say that you have to allow the democratic process to move forward. You absolutely cannot let the situation in Senegal deteriorate. And so Sall made the decision 10 days before the election. He made the decision to release Brother Faye and Brother Sanko from prison. So this was on March the 14th. The election was held on March the 24th. So Faye had spent 335 days in detention. They call it pre-trial detention. I guess they wouldn't give him a bond or whatever. They had 10 days before the election. The fact that he was able to get over 54% of the vote 10 days after being released from prison. Released from prison on March 14th. The election was held on March 24th, which was on a Sunday, and he got 54% of the vote. And I think what that shows, it shows two things. One, it shows that they have spent the last 10 years organizing at the grassroots level, particularly among the youth of Senegal, because this is unheard of, unprecedented, that a person could come out of jail and 10 days later be elected. So the organization was already in place. It was just a matter of, who they would have on the ballot. All right. And there was no arguing, no kind of ego types of things between these two brothers. They are both working in the interest. Sanko, I think, is 49. Faye is 44. They're working in the interest of African people. Okay. And so they were able to pull off this election. And since the quote unquote, the tribes of the North Atlantic claim to be democracies, they had no choice but to hail the victory as a success, as opposed to the coups, this is their language, that took place in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. I call them rebellions because that's what it really is, a rebellion against neocolonialism. So they had no choice but to praise the peaceful democratic process that took place in Senegal. Now, This is a major blow to the tribes of the North Atlantic because Senegal, along with Cote d'Ivoire, have been the pillars of French neocolonialism. Since the independence movements of the 1960s, and they were able to install, people like Felix Houphouët-Boigny in Cote d'Ivoire and Leopold Senghor in Senegal. These countries have been stable French neo-colonies. Okay. So for them to potentially lose Senegal to a person that's African descent, Brother Faye is a graduate of Cheikh Anta Diop University in Dakar. During his first speech, he mentioned the Pan-African visions and inspirations that he received from the great Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop while he was studying there at the university. So they are definitely going to try to manipulate them, but based on the history of these brothers, I don't see them being able to undermine them through their normal processes, then which means that they turn to other means, such as the way by which they removed, brother, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Modibo Keita, several other positive African leaders, the way they removed them. So, but this is a problem. This is a problem, and it represents a tremendous opportunity, in my opinion, for the youth of Africa to follow this model in the other neo-colonies in West Africa and organize and begin to remove all of these neo-colonial puppets, from office. So I think this is a blow has been struck in West Africa. It's coming from the former French colonies, which may be surprising to some people, but they have struck a blow against neocolonialism. But we know the neocolonialists are not going to take this sitting down. Niger has requested that the AFRICOM remove themselves from Niger. Of course, we know that we've been talking for years about the $100 million plus drone spy base that Barack Obama had built in Agadez, Niger, supposedly to help provide security, but all they've actually done is sit by and watch and support the jihadists who spread out of or Libya, or were inspired by the destabilization of Libya to attack. The Sahel now has the highest rate of terrorism in the world. The highest rate of terrorism in the world from these jihadist organizations linked to the Islamic State, which is clearly a product of United States foreign policy. So, there's an enormous struggle yet to be waged. But what is taking place in Senegal, I just want to mention this, is what Kwame Nkrumah called a threefold process towards liberation and empowerment: seize, hold, and develop. Seize, hold, and develop. So we've been able to seize. African people focused on Abibi Fahodie, or African liberation, have been able to seize, various countries, seize control of the reins of various countries. So, Thomas Sankara would probably be the last great example of this in 1984. After seize, you have to be able to hold. That means you have to have the ability to protect the government that you've established, the leaders of the government that you've established, and the government that you've established that's working in the interest of the masses of African people, and then develop. Okay. The development is beneath the soil in these countries. Okay. So the development is taking place, but it's been to the benefit of France and to the tribes of the North Atlantic. So that's the process. So in Senegal and in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they've been able to accomplish the first part. With the alliance of Sahel states, they are moving in the direction of holding, by forming this military alliance, because they recognize you have to be able to defend what you have taken, and then towards the development. So these are very interesting times, but I think this is the time, if you're going to do something to help move African people towards liberation and empowerment, towards the Bibi Fahodier, this is the time to do it. And I just hope that the youth in other parts of West Africa and other parts of the whole African continent are inspired, by what is taking place, in Senegal.